participate in this meeting, including auxiliary aids or services, please contact the city clerk's office at 310-952-1720 at least 48 hours prior to the meeting. The public may address members of the city council on any matters within the jurisdiction of the city council or on any items on the agenda of the city council during the designated public comment periods. There will be 2 oral communication sessions, one for agendized items, that's items on the agenda, and the other for non-agendized items. Live stream. The public may view this meeting live stream via the internet, www.carsonca.gov, or on YouTube, www.youtube.com/C/City of Carson, California official YouTube page, or on cable TV, Spectrum Channel 35 and AT&T Channel 99. You may also email public comments to the city clerk's office. The cutoff time to submit any email communications is 11 a.m. on the day of the meeting. Written communications can be dropped off at the city clerk's office or in the white box outside of City Hall. The cutoff time to submit any written communication is 11 a.m. on the day of the meeting. Written communications dropped off at the city clerk's office or at the white box or any email received will not be read aloud at the council meeting, but will be circulated to the city council and incorporated into the record. Madam City Clerk, could you call roll, please?
Councilmember Rojas, Councilmember Hicks,
Present.
Councilmember Deere, Mayor Pro Tem Hilton,
Present.
Mayor Davis Holmes.
Present. Quick question. Were all my colleagues notified that we were having a special meeting?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, because I heard one say they were not notified, or I just called the meeting. So I just want to put it into the record. Everyone was notified of this meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We'll have a flag salute by Councilman Hicks.
Everyone, please stand and face the flag. Right hand over your heart. Ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have a bishop in the house other than our one that's seated to my right? If not, oh, there's our council aide. Pastor, come on down, KW. I asked if we have a bad pastor or bishop. What happened here?
Let us pray. Thank you, Father, for another day, for another opportunity to give you praise, glory, and honor. We pray your blessings over our council, over our mayor, over the entire city of Carson. We just give you glory and praise on today. We pray blessings throughout this meeting. We ask these blessings in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, were there any requests to speak on any items on the agenda?
None received, Mayor.
Okay. Item number 1, Community Services User Fee Study Update. Staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Today's special meeting, I'm going to actually ask our revenue manager, Chris Gagnier, to reintroduce our revenue cost specialist consultant that assisted with the fee study. She can give a breakdown of what today's workshop will incorporate.
It is. Oh, there we go. Thank you. I'll begin again. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and City Council. We are before you today to do a second presentation of a fee study workshop. Today's presentation is solely going to focus on community services and transportation fees. The consulting team, RCS, will discuss the city programs and provide you with recommendations. City staff is available to answer any questions during the course of the presentation. I'd like to turn the meeting over to Eric and Chu.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, members of the council. It's good to be here again with you today. I want to talk with you about the community services fees, as Chris mentioned, that will be different than how we talked about all the other fees. What will be the same is how we calculated the cost. We sat down with staff, we identified where staff is spending their time, we allocated out cost, supplies and non-personnel costs. We calculated the personnel cost. We added all the overheads in, and we have the cost detailed just like we do with every other service. But then what we do with it then is completely different, because we can't just say this is what it costs fully burdened for a adult softball league, because people wouldn't pay it. They would decide that that's too expensive and they would go someplace else or not play at all. And so these fees are market-based. People have a choice as to whether or not they receive the service, and they will decide based on that whether or not they do it or not. And so when we're looking at this, and we're also trying to be more flexible for staff to be able to set fees that fit within your goals, but also the ability to change things as market conditions change, as tastes change, as just how people are receiving the service change. And so want to talk with you about looking at this in terms of cost recovery goals for direct cost. And so let me pull up the spreadsheet here. Okay. And so this was the appendix in the back of the report, Appendix C, I believe. And so you see all of the various different recreation programs, community services programs that we identified. We identified the program cost, which is the direct part-time salaries and benefits, as well as the direct supplies and services for each service. We identified the full-time cost, so that's the full-time staff that spend time directly on these services and their salaries and benefits, to give us our total direct cost. So it doesn't include cost for facilities, doesn't include cost for fields, doesn't include cost for department overhead or citywide overhead. So it's really the cost of the program. And we're asking you to focus on this because we want you to set a goal, and based on these goals, staff make some decisions on individual fees. And then they come back to you and say how they met your goals or didn't meet your goals and why. It's easier for them to generate those costs on an annual basis if we're looking at just the direct costs. The department knows what the cost of their programs are. It's harder when you add in facility costs and you add an overhead cost to be able to come up with a cost recovery goal based on all of that on an ongoing basis. So that's why we're focusing on direct cost. And then we looked at the revenues for each of these programs. Now this was in 2021, and have a direct cost recovery for each program. And a bottom line program direct cost recovery of about 30%, that 29.9 at the bottom there. And then we looked at what should be a direct cost recovery goal from our perspective. Of course, this is why we're here to talk to you, to find out what makes sense for you, for resident and non-resident. And if you notice, the direct cost recovery for residents is pretty stable. It's pretty close to where your cost recovery is today. It's on the non-resident side that we're pushing the fees up for people that don't live in Carson, for them to pay a higher piece and get a little higher cost recovery for them. And so that's where we're at today as far as what we're recommending, what we're looking at, and I throw it back to the council for questions, concerns, issues.
For me, you're calculating cost of equipment, cost of facilities, all the direct costs. Is that what you're saying?
The facilities and the equipment are not part of the direct cost. So we've identified that cost down at the bottom here. And so we have this indirect cost at the bottom here. We have the facility maintenance and utilities and city and department overhead. But you see that's an extra $13, $14 million that we're not including in this calculation. Not that the costs don't exist and aren't real and aren't important, but when looking at this from a cost recovery goal, if we add that in and say, okay, it's instead of a 50% now, it needs to be 25%. But now when staff comes back to you a year from now and tries to tell you how they're doing with your goals, it becomes much harder for them to calculate. Now they got to go to Public Works, identify what's the cost of Public Works staff, and allocate that, and are the facilities being used. And so it just makes it harder for staff going forward to be able to report back to you on whatever goals you agree on.
So where you have park facilities, maintenance, utilities cost $6 million, and the cost to recover is 17.80%.
So that's saying right now we're at about 29.9% cost recovery. When we add in the facility cost, that takes the recovery down to about 17.8%. When we add in the overhead cost, that takes it down even further to about 11%. So on the whole, the department's only recovering 11% of its fully burdened cost. All the overheads, all the facility maintenance. But when looking at what should a cost recovery goal be, looking at it as a part of this direct cost at the top here, so the direct salaries, the direct supplies, looking at how are the revenues coming in compared to those costs, and what should the goal for that program be based on that.
Okay, under youth sports, this includes their registration fees, or what is that?
Correct.
Okay, we decided a couple of months ago that all of our kids would participate free of charge.
Right.
There will be no cost to anyone to participate in our programs. And then also, correct me, Tariq, I have an endowment coming in that's gonna bring in another $350,000. A check came in for that amount to cover youth sports in its entirety. So I'd like that reflected in this report. It is this council's intent to get our kids back out and participating in programs. For me, theirs is free. My other concern is that if we decided to charge all these direct and indirect costs, and we didn't get the participants, we would need the staff.
That's correct. And that's why we want to make sure that the recovery goals that we have in here are something that makes sense. So for instance, on the special interest enrichment classes, right now you're recovering about 53.6% of your direct cost. So we recommended a 55% cost recovery goal, in essence flat. So for residents, there would be no fee change.
Okay.
But for non-residents, we're recommending a 75% cost recovery goal. So non-residents would pay more than residents are currently, and residents would pay the same amount based on this recommendation.
And non-residents were always supposed to pay more. If they really want to participate in our program, because our residents, Carson resident, 90746, 90745, 90810.
Yes.
We want them in our programs. Anybody that wants to come, they should be willing to pay the cost, so.
Right. And so these cost recovery goals are, for residents, pretty much the same. They're fairly flat, with the exception of the youth sports, as you mentioned. It's on the non-resident side that we're saying non-residents should pay a little bit more than they are today, and pushing that
Probably a
recovery
whole
goal
lot
higher.
more,
Madam Mayor,
In some cases, a whole lot.
a whole lot more. Councilman Hicks?
this may be to the city manager and his staff. In regards to, if you go back to the park maintenance, you had on your slide, I don't know what policy or where it's placed, but based upon a residence paying their taxes and other stuff that they pay here, wouldn't park maintenance and just street maintenance, that'd be part of what they already pay currently? So I didn't know that there was even a cost recovery aspect of that.
If I could, this doesn't include park maintenance. Park maintenance is separate. This is park facility maintenance. So for the facilities, the community centers at the parks.
Even that should be included.
What?
The maintenance of the bill, any of the maintenance is already should be in part of the process of when you pay your taxes or you pay.
That's
so,
what our
but I
UUT
didn't know
was-
it's a cost recovery factor that's a part of that.
It's not.
Oh.
It's included. We identified the cost because we costed out everything. But once we costed out everything for community services programs, we peeled that off, when we peeled off the overhead and said, let's just look at the direct cost. And so we're saying that those other costs are tax supported. And it's for this program cost. How much of the program cost do you want to be paid for by the person using the service, and how much do you want to be paid for by the taxpayer? So if we're saying a 50% cost recovery goal, that's saying 50% by the user and 50% by the taxpayer, just of those direct costs. So direct salaries, direct supplies, all of the facility maintenance, all of the overhead costs, are pulled off, and we're saying those are all tax supported.
And the other part of that is that we called it so many different names, Measure C, Measure K, or but when we had that to go through and the residents agreed to that, it was because we were not going to be going up on the fees because they're going to be paying it in this tax. So my concern is not to look at anything increasing at all. If anything, to try and reduce it down, or say if this council deems necessary, we just do a 25% cost recovery across the board, or we do whatever that number might be, versus, and what you're recommending is that 50% based upon adult sports, 25% based upon, based upon Measure C and Measure K, and when that went through, it was part of the process of saying that we were not going to go up on any of our fees, and they said, okay, we would do this.
Well, they're paying for them already. They're
Yes.
paying for them in advance without any, and for me, I'd like to see the projected revenue that we're getting from those UUT and Measure K, because that's how we sold it, that if you pass this, it will maintain your parks and recreation programs, it will maintain your police and do whatever. So if we're getting 9 million annually in this UUT, that should be reflected in here, and then if there's a shortcome, it should be reflected, because they're already paying without any conversation at all on those two measures alone. And I think one is 9 million, Tariq, correct me, one is what, 14?
The UUT Measure R is $9 million. Measure K, it's $18 million.
$18 million, so we shouldn't even be talking about fees for our residents other than for non-residents, what we should be focusing on, because our residents have already agreed to pay upfront without any discussion. And for me, I'm not going to go back and say, okay, now you have to pay a registration fee or a youth fee. They already paid God knows how many million. You'll have some money left over.
So does that mean for,
See?
I was going to say, but there's a discrepancy with that, with this non-fee thing. There's a discrepancy because one of the parents, Carson resident, came to me and asked me. I said, "Well, all of them are supposed to be free now." And then I talked to Mr. Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker said, "In kind of like in theory." So can we get some? While we got a pen here, can we get some explanation on is the
theory.
registration free, or is sports free, or is it not?
So if we could just kind of, we'll allow Mr. Whitaker to answer that for you, Mayor Pro Tem and Mayor and Councilman Hicks. At the bottom of this particular presentation that Eric was showing, so there's two different buckets we want to make sure that we're talking about. So we're talking about one, youth sports registration, things of that nature. That's exactly what you all campaigned and had residents advise that they're not going to have fees increase because of this measure is going to pass. That number on that line 38 about park facilities, maintenance, utilities, those kind of things, that's the cost recovery that we're making reference to as far as potentially increasing those, because the industry standard, and Robert Lennox can correct me, and I'm sure Eric and his team can as well, but the industry standard on cost recovery for park facilities maintenance, this isn't fees for programming, this is like use of the facilities, is about a 45 to 55% cost recovery, whereas we're at 17%. So that's why they're highlighting this. Not about necessarily increasing fees for sports or registration.
So when you guys say maintenance, you're talking about like custodial work or painting of the building, bathroom. What is the maintenance?
HVAC work,
Right,
roof leaks,
Right.
your typical maintenance work, as well as the utilities?
Why would our residents pay for that?
Well, they're not. Yeah, right. And so, because the fees are set at a level that they don't even recover the direct cost. That's what we're talking about up here. So everything that's less than 100% up here means that, and nothing is over 100%. All of these programs are not recovering their cost, just their direct cost. And so then when we add in facility cost and we add in overhead cost, that makes that picture even less so. You're recovering even less. So if we just take those off the table, facilities off the table, paid for entirely by the taxpayer, overhead and paid for entirely by the taxpayer, the rentals, the cost of the program cost, the services, the employees working on rentals, you're recovering about 72.4%. you're doing well. Doesn't include the maintenance, though. Maintenance is still separate. So just your direct cost for rentals, you're recovering about 3/4 of those direct costs, which is good. And we're not recommending anything higher for a resident. And it's only for the non-resident that we're recommending that staff have the ability to push those and see what the market will bear. Because all of these, you could set a non-resident rate at double what the resident rate is, and you probably will lose all your non-residents, which probably is not a good thing, because non-residents are good for filling in the gaps, where there's maybe only residents are only using this much of the program, and there's a capacity for this much, and that brings in some extra money for that capacity. So you don't want to freeze out your residents, but they should pay more. They're not paying into the
But
tax base.
if
Madam
my memory
Mayor.
serves me right, you cannot charge more than what the actual cost recovery is, because you can't charge more than what it, because the city cannot be in the business of making money.
Right, but you're not anywhere close to that.
Okay, but I'm just saying for even that service, so if that service is X and we can't go to Y because it has to be what X is only, you cannot go to a higher
Right.
threshold.
Right. But the bigger thing governing all of that is the market. And that's where it never lets you get to that point, because if you get to that point, people won't come at all, which is not good.
Well, for me, I'm only concerned about my residents, and whatever the non-residents want to pay, they can bear. That's, oh well, they have a city. We offer good programs here, and for me, I want all my residents to participate. The non-residents, if you just have to come to Carson, it's gonna cost you whatever the market will bear. Because once we had lots of non-residents in our program, and we had, before we came with this resident, non-resident fees, we had our residents on a waiting list. Because it was such a good program, and they were, because of registration, the first come, first served kind of theory, so we came with this resident, non-resident rate. And so for me, staff, whatever the market will bear for non-residents, charge them. If they don't come, then our facilities are not being used. Oh, well.
And so that means we're keeping, because what the recommendations here in this resident direct cost recovery is basically status quo. Other than the youth sports, we're recommending that the resident fees stay about the same, and non-resident fees have some increases based on what the market will pay.
Well, so let's take, adult sports. You recoup, direct cost recovery is only 36%.
And so we are saying bumping that one up a little bit to 50%.
Your adult sports has residents and non-residents. We could not run an adult sports program with only residents. Okay. So the adult sports program was always to be self-sustaining.
But it's actually doing less.
Doing less now.
The minimum it was supposed to do, now that's back when I was superintendent, it was $100,000 minimum in revenue, and I'm seeing the 88. And I know we're coming off the pandemic and other things has transpired, but the base was $100,000.
And you are correct, Councilmember Hicks, because this is 2020, 2021 data. So it's reflecting the pandemic effect on usage.
And we were trying to look ahead a little bit on the revenues because of that, but even 21, 22 was affected. And so, yeah, the revenues are in a difficult place in coming up with estimates.
Yeah. So these are not really reflective of when, say, 2017 or 2018, when you had more of a robust money being collected. This is what has been from the pandemic.
Okay. Looking at 88, you're just not even paying the adult sports coordinator salary.
No.
Once you debt load it, and it was always designed to be self-sustaining, taking their salary. So looking at these numbers right now, because the participation level is down. It's 120 plus is what this program used to bring in. So I would like to look at where we were pre-pandemic, to see what numbers were coming in. Youth sports, MPT?
I'm with y'all. This is y'all field of expertise, because you guys have managed the budget for years. You being past and present and future superintendents. So I agree with y'all. I believe I have the consensus on that, because you guys will know best of what the full cost recovery and what you've seen the program provide. So I yield to y'all wisdom on this.
Yes, Councilman.
Also, when in this report, for me, to actually give us what the fees are that each one is being charged. You have this information here, but also a sheet that has what the fees are, what they're paying, to know based upon the percentage, and I can do the calculation real quickly based on what you're trying to go from, whatever that number might be.
Because staff actually did some recommendations.
Oh, Tariq knew what I was going to ask. You knew what I was going to ask. Huh?
Yes, and I think we have that data. We want to show you the actual rate that the residents are paying.
Okay.
So,
Thank you. Sorry.
So staff went through and, I don't know if I turn over, Michael, spent a lot of time going through, felt what they was appropriate for the various different programs, and I'll turn it over to the man who did it.
What is this one for now? Proposed future early childhood
What the
education.
fees are and what they propose. Maybe I to know what they're trying to say to go to.
15% to $34. How much is that?
Yeah.
What happened to my phone? Thank you.
You'd have tore it up.
So let me
Throw it out.
go to like,
There you go.
How do I make it look like?
so for instance,
You should push up. Pull it from the top. Pull the screen from the top. It should just go up. Yeah.
Oh, now. Yeah, that's now.
Oh, it's on a base. You want the tilt?
I think it's this light right here.
That's good.
High gloss.
I can see this real good, yeah.
Yeah, it makes my eyes hurt, like, but not like this. Now that I got it up here.
These are the new ones. But I thought they used to.
Well, no, just tell them to
Tilted for.
fix it where we can have the computers like this. Thank you.
all right. Oh, oh.
That's a team rate. No, no one be playing but you and I.
You want to just take them through adult sports here? You want to just take them through adult sports here? Looking at her.
Okay. Either way.
Mine is perfect.
We'll manage this and.
Okay,
Mike will sit
where are
there.
we now?
All right, ready?
Yeah,
So if we look at adult sports on the screen here, on the left are the current fees. And so you see the 36.6% cost recovery for the resident and non-resident rate combined. When we break out what a 50% cost recovery would look like for a resident and a 100% cost recovery would look like for non-resident, those are the next two columns with the green headings. And so you see for baseball, a resident fee would go from $420 to $476. A non-resident fee would go from $479 to $807.
that's for women's softball.
Women's softball, $355 to $403. So that's where we're going from the 36% to the 50%.
What are the surrounding cities paying? How did this compare?
When they were saying for women's softball, the comparisons are $800 or $900 per team.
And we only charging 4 or 5?
Yes, ma'am.
Really?
What's our participation? Do we have full, is it a waiting list to be in our adult sports? Or if ours is at that low, we should be busting at the seams?
We should be. We actually, for adult sports, we have more co-ed teams than we have anything. There's very minimal participation for women's softball for women only. Most of the programs that we have are for co-ed softball.
So you're talking about non-resident 807 and resident 476? And the going rate is 8?
Yes, ma'am.
What's wrong with staff? What,
Well, I think part of it, Mayor, I think part of the
But it's
answer
not
to that,
packed, even
you
at
don't
that-
you don't miss what you don't know, and so if you're a resident in Carson and you're accustomed to paying $420 as a team, you're paying that fee, but you may even get to a point to say, boy, 420 as a team is a lot of money. Whereas somebody in Long Beach, as an example, they pay $932 or $940, somewhere around there, as a team. They just know to pay $940 as a team, and they think, wow, this might be a little bit much for us. But if someone said, oh, but in Carson they only pay $400, that's great, but they're not residents. But they wouldn't really know, they don't know our fees, just like we didn't, unless we go out and search. So residents don't know that live in Carson what other surrounding cities or fees are paying. So they just know 400 is 400. They don't know if it's high, don't know if it's low.
yes, they do. Because they
They may, but they
shop.
Well, they shop, but they're not going to be able to pay and play somewhere else if they're not a resident, right? Without paying the higher fees.
When we started doing this, our fees were low and we had the best fields. We, once upon a time, had the best fields. And,
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right, Madam Mayor. I think too I think this exercise partly is because, to my understanding, your fees haven't been raised, if at all, in. You would probably know better the number
since
of
he was the
years.
director.
And honestly,
One of the
we
reasons
have
behind that, it
provided
hasn't been done
recommendations.
because the fields weren't up to par. And that's been a biggest issue that I've had back in the day of getting those fields where they should be. In the surrounding cities, fields were better. I actually looked at them. I won't go into the personal issue that I used to have with the person that's over Public Works Department, but I'm just saying there were things that were not being done.
So, do you know, Mike, through the city manager, do you know how many adult sports teams we have? Because it used to be a waiting list.
Yeah, we no longer, we have, we're open at this particular point. It's not a waiting list.
The pandemic, but our staff has assured us that our fields are going to be back where they should be. But if someone is paying for co-ed, and that's the #1 sport, 420, we should be, somebody's not doing their job. Let me just sum it up. When your salary was contingent upon you getting teams, Mike, you remember this? We were bursting at the seams. If I'm going to get paid the same amount of money for getting 2 teams as versus 50 teams, what is the incentive?
That's correct. It was actually put into our goals and objectives in regards to what we do annually. And that was removed from the goals and objectives, and I have just put that back into the goals and objectives based on the school sites that each individual park is close to. That's what's determined what their numbers or their projected numbers should be.
Absolutely, because your numbers go up when the incentive is there. If there is no incentive, I can come to work and none of the kids at the park greeting me, I'm getting the same pay. And I know we have a lot of concern about how that is, but I would like to see, you say you have in the goals and objectives, but to me, this number needs to increase. And it's not to be cost recovery, but it should be at a level that the teams can bear. And they're probably laughing at us at 420 and they're paying 9. But if we have at 420 and not getting the team, something is wrong.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I may too, just to give you a little bit more background, our neighboring city of Torrance, just in pulling up all of their current season registrations for team sports and adults, it ranges on the low end, and this is all their sports, it ranges on the low end, 500 all the way up to 800, depending on the sport. And even on the ones that are currently under registration, there are several of the divisions that are already sold out, and those were at $725 per team on a 10-week season. So the demand is there. I think it's a function of marketing, quality, and of course, other cities like Long Beach, their fees are typically higher than Torrance or ours.
So what would be a happy medium for us? Four is not gonna get it done.
I would suggest we do more of a tiered increase so that it doesn't hit them hard the very first time we scare everybody away. So maybe over a 2-year period or even a 3-year period, we gradually go up a percentage point, maybe 10% each year or 15% each year until we get to our desired cost recovery.
So for resident 5 and non-residents, what? I see 420, I just can't digest that.
Want to make that recommendation, non-residents should be higher?
Well, because we do have the recommendation that the non-residents pay for, looking at baseball here, the resident would go from 420 to 476, but the non-resident would go up to more of a market rate, the 807.
Okay, well, so they don't have to subtract and add, just make it 500.
For
I like
everybody?
round numbers. For resident, you had 476?
Just make it 500, make it 500 flat.
Well, make it 500 flat. And then do your tiered approach.
I do think maybe Robertson can explain this. Rates are also based on number of teams, staff coverage. That's why they're not all flat rate.
Well, you're talking about co-ed, and most of those teams,
We
even
have some
though
with 300.
51% may be resident, the rest of them are non-residents. You're only getting 51% that, if you have that many, you may have it may probably is less.
Right.
If you have the guy the manager that signs up, he could be a Carson resident, and the members could be non-resident.
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's absolutely true. The way other cities manage that is they simply set the rules. If your manager is a resident, then you would qualify for the resident rate, right? And that is it, right? So, if a team finds one of their teammates who lives in the city, then they will benefit from that rate.
And we used to check the rosters, and it had to be 51% had to be residents in order to qualify for that resident rate. I don't know if they're.
Yeah, most cities aren't doing that just simply because of the amount of time it takes to verify.
So you're still dealing with non-residents across the board. Because my manager, who can't even play, he just comes and signs up the team, and he gets a non-resident rate. That's an easy fix. So the cheapest price for Torrance is what?
The cheapest one, at least in their current season of play, is it's actually at hold on 1 second to tell you. I'm sorry, 585, and that's for adult softball on a 10-week season. That's their lowest price. That is for men's.
And we haven't had a price increase since
Me.
I was the superintendent, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
So,
So,
don't be bashful.
In my opinion, we're looking at for residents, we are paying 420, non-residents. I agree with the recommendation that was given in regards to trying to increase that to 807 and get closer to that number. So,
To who, 807?
yes,
And
which is
that's for non-resident or
for
resident?
non-residents, that is correct. We want to give our residents a break also, but we still need to get them higher than 36% cost recovery. I think this is something that for that particular, for baseball, for women's softball, all of those, we should be able to get those to at least 50% cost recovery.
And what would that look like?
That's it's on the chart.
So, right, so Mayor, so I think,
50%?
We
50% cost recovery is on the
476
chart.
for residents, 403 for, so in other words, it's the first column for.
Oh,
column-
resident.
column E.
So just
Right.
let's round it up to 500, please.
okay, I think, but I think the recommendation too is if you said, now you said 500 for all the adult that are highlighted there, Mayor, or are you just talking about just for the baseball?
Well, I'm looking at baseball. Women's softball is at 403.
Right.
And that's at 50% cost recovery.
Right. Co-ed is 476, and then seniors 357. So you're saying to get 50% cost recovery, are you saying you want all 4 of those resident fees to be $500 even?
Well,
Or
with 357, you're not capturing anything. You're not even paying for, what are you getting for 357?
So,
Madam Mayor, I would suggest that we look at it a little bit differently. I would say that baseball and co-ed softball are hardcore sports. Those are where our highest numbers are. Women's softball and also senior softball, we really don't have major programs. Senior softball, I don't think we have a program for senior softball. These numbers were put in case we do or we're able to garner a program that is for senior softball. And it's also the same for women's softball.
the strategy as well, Madam Mayor, might be to really look at this in terms of a percentage target, right? I can appreciate us wanting to keep it a sort of a flat, round figure for marketability, but noting too that over time, the demand will change and the cost to operate programs will change. If you end up adopting a percentage of cost recovery, then it gives staff the freedom to adjust that registration fee to match the percentage of cost recovery goal.
So you want to stay at 476 is what you're saying?
I would recommend, I would recommend the percentage of cost recovery. That would be a better way to approach, that's just my opinion, because it gives more flexibility over time.
Okay.
And it allows you, the city, to keep up with its fees. If you set this goal, you've told staff, we want to meet these goals, and so that's their job now is to meet these goals and come back to you and tell you why they haven't. So it allows them to, so we're not in a position where it's been 17 years since the fees were last changed.
So it'd be 476 for residents, 807 for non-residents.
For baseball.
For baseball. My concern is still a person that lives in Carson that is not even on the team can come and get the non-resident rate. You have to put in a tool where it's at least 51% of these people are Carson residents.
So, Madam Mayor, yes, we can do that. Instead of only requiring the manager,
Yes.
we can verify rosters.
Okay.
Yes.
And so that's where we were looking at earlier with the cost recovery goals, and certainly understand why you want to see how that turns into dollars. Didn't know if you want to go through and look at some other programs that are on here also, such as aquatics.
Kids Club program.
Okay. So you see a slight increase for residents and a larger increase for non-residents to
Right.
get to 75% direct cost recovery for residents and 100% direct cost recovery for non-residents.
So Mayor, just so you can see, I mean, if you have one child, it's a $3 increase
For the resident.
for the resident. If you have 2 children, $2 increase for the resident. And if you have 3, it's $2 increase also.
Yeah, I'm still concerned about the non-resident. I think there should be higher because
And it is, so you're not,
$10 is not high to me.
right, your non-resident right now is $60 for one child. It would go to $78. So that's a
Okay.
$18 increase, and that's to get 100% cost recovery. And you're at capacity, if I believe that's correct, on your
That
kids
is correct.
club. So you're going to get 100% recovery on this recommendation for the non-residents going up. Basically, the highest is going to be anyone with 3 children is going to be a $36 difference.
Well, that'll be 100% cost recovery.
That's 100%. Yes, ma'am.
And that's
100%.
where it should have been anyway.
Yes,
How
ma'am.
many, do you know, have a feel for how many non-residents are in the program?
The majority of our programs, I would say non-residents, it has to be about 35%. Most of those kids actually live right here in the city.
Because you pick them up from the schools.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. We don't want our residents' fees to go up.
So we're going to keep it flat at the $50 or 53?
Right. You want to leave the residents as is and then increase the non-residents, correct?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. we get that. Okay. It's okay.
Now, is that policy just for Kids Club or more across the board?
I like it across the board for our residents. They're paying already through those measures that we put in place.
So across the board, Mayor, you're saying to keep the resident rates as is, but the non-residents, you want us to
Do
go
whatever you want to do.
Take that to the
to the T.
I was always told that it should always be non-resident to be at 100% cost recovery. Whatever that
100%
cost recovery is for non-residents, that should
and
be
that's
there.
typically standard, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. That at least from our research, and I'm sure probably
Yeah,
Eric
for
and the team
non-residents.
could
And
probably
then
say
the
same.
other part of it was to include any of the team sports that it had to be 51% that's on that roster must be Carson residents,
Or they pay the resident rate.
or they pay the resident rate.
Yeah, the
That's correct.
non-resident
And,
rate.
that,
Yeah,
and,
not
that,
yet.
and that's still being applied as well.
And then to just keep, because of Measure K and all the different measures that have been approved, to keep the fees as they are currently. And then the youth sports fees, registration is free.
Got it. So all fees, status quo for youth. No fees for the youth. Sports.
Sports.
Registration, youth sports registration fees, and that includes cheerleaders too, because that's a sport. It's free. Cheer.
The cheer. Oh yeah. Of
Okay,
course. Yes, ma'am.
MPT had a question earlier. In theory,
Yeah, he wanted to know what is the price of registration, and we wanted to make sure there was an understanding. The registration is the part that's being covered by this, that's being covered by the city. The other portion is their uniform, picture, and trophy package. We did receive a grant recently of $300,000, and so we're going to be utilizing that for youth sports program as well, where it's going to cover half of their package for the uniform, pictures, and trophies as well. We still
Why
want to
wouldn't-
have a small portion that they have to pay so that to make sure that they are, part of the program. We want to make sure they're showing up and they're actually part of the program. We find that when they don't pay anything, they don't have as much care.
well, their uniforms, the way I requested it, would be free. Now, they don't have to have pictures, and they don't have to have trophies. That's icing on the cake. Now, I would say charge them for their picture package and their trophies, and if a parent chooses not to have pictures, that's on them. But every child with this grant is supposed to have a uniform, and their registration fee is free. When I requested that dollar amount be put in there,
Right, and so we have that. We were just sharing right now with Tariq, Madam Mayor. That is going to cover your kids' registration, youth, I should say, registration, youth, and if there's monies left over or whatever is available, to also cover for trophies or those things, right?
the registration fee the city is absorbing, this $350,000 is for uniforms
Uniforms.
and whatever else. But the registration fee, the city waived
We
that
waived the registration.
before
and
the
uniforms,
endowment
the
came
350.
into play. So you guys,
So we'll make sure we have that
you're trying
figured
to
out.
trying to see if I know my math. We, the city, are absorbing registration fees.
Yes.
Youth sports, cheerleader song, whatever. We
Yes.
are not charging. This extra money is for uniforms.
Got it.
And it was a check delivered for $350,000.
Just wanted that clarity because a parent walked up to me, and actually it was like 2 minutes after she walked up to me, I was walking next to Mike, and I just wanted that clarity because I don't want to be out saying that something is free, and then when they get there, and so if I could explain, yeah, we're gonna cover the registration costs, we cover this, but you have to pay for your pictures and your trophy, then because when people hear free, they don't hear the fine print. So I just want to make sure that I was getting all the fine print and getting that clarity and that information because I had been telling people that it was absolutely free. Like, oh, it's free. Go on down there and register, you know. And then when the lady said that she had to pay, it just kind of threw me when it. So I was like, well, maybe the mayor ain't signed the resolution yet. So just it'll be free in about 30 more days. So I don't know. So those were the things. Thanks.
So, uniforms for a year would cost about what? You guys roughly know?
Go ahead, Mike.
The contract that we have, we are for the uniform. I'm not 100% accurate. Robert, do you know what that number is?
Madam Mayor, we don't know the number off the top of our heads, but I recall about 6 or 7 months ago, the council approved those contracts. $300,000 would likely cover you for a year and a half or so. What we know is that the amount of enrollment in youth sports, it fluctuates. And so as the programs become more popular, you're going to spend down on that grant more quickly. So we could certainly estimate a year and a half of coverage. But if the team does an amazing job in marketing it and running the program, that could be eliminated much quicker than that. So the task for the team is going to be to track and monitor that donation, and then we can report back as we get closer to the end, so you're not caught off guard when that does expire.
Madam Mayor, I did also do a little calculations in regards to the $350,000 per year. The uniforms average anywhere from $50 to $60 for that, so we'll be able to cover 5,800 uniforms for the actual youth sports program, so that should get us about a year and a half because we're only using those funds for residents only. Non-residents still paying. So that number is not as high. It's only 75% of the people that are in the program that these fees will go towards.
Okay. It's my intent to have that 350 every year.
Wonderful.
So let us know, but yeah,
Sure.
I want our kids back in the park. I want them playing. I want them playing free. And again, parents need to know that
Pictures and trophies on their cost.
that's where you make the commitment.
We'll make that, and we'll make sure the distinction on that as well when we market it out, as it's being marketed out, that your registration, your uniform is free.
For this season, let's do it season by season. Registration always, but the uniforms on a
for this, we'll say for this
year.
season, this year, uniforms will be free, and we'll install. But then each year is a case by case basis, basically coming to you all as we find out if there's donations or whatever the case may be. And that way, when you all are speaking to your constituents, you're able to share with them this year. There may be a half cost or whatever it may be, or like you said, Mayor, it's the intent to be free every year with the uniforms, but right now we have a grant for it this year, so we know we'll be able to cover this year. But we'll also distinguish that pictures and trophies are going to be up to the parents.
It should be up to the parents of the volunteer association. That's why the snack bars, if they're up and running, are supposed to be able to pick up these
help to pay
costs.
for that, sure.
They don't.
Madam Mayor, I think historically they had, but that change was made last year when the council approved the 3 contracts for the city to cover that cost, because staff is the one that has to do all that purchasing, and really alignment with the enrolled
Wait a minute.
youth.
When we tried the policy for the trophies and uniforms, staff, the volunteers are not selecting the uniforms?
No, they assist with selecting them, but staff does the procurement and distribution.
You guys have ran off my volunteers.
No, ma'am, not at all. I think the previous approach to this was that the volunteer associations were the ones who were tasked with collecting the fees, basically running all of that.
They were running.
Yeah.
Well, why can't they be tasked with doing the trophies and the pictures then?
Because if the city was the one collecting the fees from the residents, from the participants, then that becomes city money, and we can't rely on non-city entities to do that procurement. As soon as the city touches those dollars, it becomes city funds, and there are some strict rules about how we do procurement, which I'm sure Tariq could elaborate on. So the intention is to try and make sure that that stays in the same hands from start to finish. I think the volunteer associations take on a separate role, which is they do fundraising for things like end of season awards and, you know, those sort of special experiences at the park. Sometimes even trying to scholarship some kids who maybe couldn't afford those fees, which has since gone by the wayside thanks to the grants. So that has evolved, I think is what I'm trying to explain. And it has in part happened as a result of the decisions the council made last year.
So you're telling me that the volunteer associations can't have their treasurer at the park on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to collect funds for trophies and pictures? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct, because that function is handled by city staff now. We have contracts that council approved with
For
vendors.
Pictures and trophies.
All of those, so pictures, trophies,
Yeah, I remember
yes,
that.
and uniforms.
What you just said is the truth, that the volunteers have been removed from the park. The volunteer association does not do what they used to do. They used to maintain all the uniforms. They used to made contact with the photographer for the pictures. They did the banquets. They did the entire thing, not at the expense of the city. It was based upon the funds they collected through the snack bar, through donations, and they ran that at the park.
Yeah,
But
I
now
think-
that's gone.
Yes, and I think in theory that was how it was intended to run. The problem was over time, the volunteer associations were not able to be on hand to do those things, and they relied on city staff to do it. So then you had city staff collecting funds that were not
The
city
volunteers
funds.
dwindled away, and that the staff had to pick up the slack when you didn't have the volunteers in the
That-
parks anymore. So,
That's correct.
and I
then-
know that the new parents of today are not the same as the parents of myself that took up on that situation. So I know now. So it has evolved.
Many of our snack bars during seasons were not open because we didn't have the
No
amount of
volunteers
volunteers
to run
needed
it.
to actually
That's
run
right.
it, because we wouldn't allow our staff members to go inside of the snack bars to take those funds. They can't do that. It has to be the
They
volunteers.
can't go inside the snack bar to do what?
To take payments for the to actually work the snack bar, to sell goods, and that has to be the volunteers doing that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
so
it has to be the
that's why a lot of them weren't open, because we
Oh.
didn't have the volunteers.
They're not open because the staff is not going to get them. If you tell them if they snack bar, anybody have a snack bar, they better have a volunteer association. These kids are out there. It's all about, I need you to run my snack bar Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You're a team mother. This is not staff going out coaching, because if you got staff coaching, you're not doing your job. Our program needs to have parents on the park. When you have parents on the park, your gang activity, your knuckleheads disappear.
Sure.
Okay, when you just have staff out there running all day long, and your parents take ownership of it.
And that was probably some of the challenges that staff was running into this past year as well, Mayors. They would have some of the volunteer signups to run the snack bars, and then there'd be no-shows. Even the kids would show up for the games. The parents would ship their kids off with some other parent to bring them to the game, and the parent that was signed up didn't show. So then we had staff step in, and then we couldn't have staff step in because, like Mike
Okay,
said, they
let's
weren't
take
allowed
this
to
another
take it,
step.
so.
You have an endowment for a uniform. In order for you to get a free uniform, you gotta work so many hours in snack bar.
Love it.
Like that.
Love it. Be more specific on the number of days of volunteerism, but I don't know.
That
Rob.
snack bar is to be open X number of days. You want a free uniform?
You got to work a minimum.
Work extra hours
You
in
do
the
a
snack
minimum
bar.
hours. 15 hours you got to work? Minimum 15-hour volunteer?
Do that? No, you can't. Oh,
We can. We were just saying that our staff still can't handle the cash, though. That's just.
they can't handle the
So
cash.
we'll-
We just solved it. You
Right.
get your snack bars are open, and then you begin that family atmosphere again, and they get to know each other like you knew me.
That's it. Even with high schools, for example, Catholic schools, if they can't afford to pay for tuition, they can volunteer to work off those hours as opposed to get a reduction.
And you
in the
have to
amount.
be there.
Yes, you have to. It's mandatory.
So you got an endowment. In order to get this uniform, you have to come work the snack bar. And your volunteer associations are working, and they're going out buying all the hot dogs and the chili, and they're open up from 6 to 9. So it's not free, the endowment. You got to put something into it.
Madam Mayor, do you think we need to figure out a minimum amount of hours?
Well, that's staff.
Okay.
MPT.
I think it helps build a sense of community if you have those people go volunteer. They don't just treat our staff like we're daycare, but they actually buy in. So I'm with it.
Drive by, drop off, keep going.
I drop, or you got to drive by and get in that snack bar.
All right,
That was
Madam
the
Mayor.
old name
And
called
the same
curbside
token,
parents.
those
You
snack
drop 'em
bars
off
need
at
to
the
be-
curb and pick
those-
them up at the curb.
Yes, you need to go through your snack bars and make sure they have everything, because Dominguez Park and other parks, staff was telling them, you don't have a refrigerator, you have to go buy one. And you have to get your microwave, we are responsible for stocking those snack bars, so, are we in baseball? We're in baseball?
Yeah, we're in baseball
We need to
now.
go through them and make sure everything that they need is in place. The refrigerators
staff.
are working, the snack bar is clean, it's been deodorized and sanitized.
Clean.
They're clean and ready to go. So when you put these demands on them to say your uniform is free, but you have to work 15 hours in the snack bar.
The superintendent and I will inspect them ourselves.
And keep in mind, some of those
That's
snack
what someone
bars.
used to do to me, though. They walk
I know,
through and
I
look.
know, I know, don't tell
He
all my
just-
secrets.
But Madam Mayor, some of those snack bars are actually health regulated, health department regulated, because they were actually built based upon a restaurant mentality. So you must maintain that same continuity when you go out and clean them up, and they're supposed to be ran that way as well.
There are a couple other services I want to talk about with you. They're a combination of transportation and recreation. And we have our recreation summer day camp trips. So currently, the person, the customer pays the cost of the bus and doesn't pay for all the staff setup of that trip. I'm suggesting that there be 125%, so a 25% surcharge on the cost of the bus that's passed through to the customer, to the user, in most cases to the resident, in all cases to the child, for a part of the staff cost.
No.
Okay. Similarly, get these out of the way. There are the group excursion trips. And so these would be going to Dodger Stadium, going to concerts, those kinds of things. So this would be members of the community that would right now, the non-resident pays the full cost of the bus. The resident pays 50% of the cost of the bus. I'm suggesting that everybody pay 100% of the cost of the bus plus the 25% for a little bit of recovery of the staff cost.
Madam Mayor, are these excursion through the senior program, or are these the ones through the community services department? I mean, the ones that we go out to the Rose Parade and.
In looking at this, it's a combination. It's all programs actually utilizing buses.
Okay.
Our seniors get X number of bus excursions a month.
Each group gets one per month.
Only one?
Each group.
Who changed that?
It's been like that for quite some time.
It was only six a year, and I made it 12.
And they doubled it to 12.
I doubled it.
They get one a month.
One a month.
One a month.
Each senior club.
Each
Yeah,
group.
one a month.
Group, and you want 125% recovery from our poor seniors that's on a fixed income?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Oh. They're on a fixed income.
Okay? All right. So it was just those two.
And what is the percentage at now? What is the cost? What are we receiving now?
Right now, you're receiving the cost of the bus. If you're a non-resident, you're paying 50% of the cost of the bus if you're a resident.
Oh, okay.
And
And what funds are we using? Measure R, Measure C? What are we using?
I believe so, yeah.
It's
I think
Measure,
there's some transportation funds in there, too.
it's Measure A.
Measure A.
It's Measure A funds. And you're trying to use Measure A and recapture money?
And you're still not recovering all of the cost.
But wait a minute, you have Measure A, X number of dollars, and you want to recapture 100% when we're getting 75% for Measure A?
Yes, but we're also suggesting that because there's all of the staff costs that go into this program, that in essence is being recovered by the taxpayer. The out-of-pocket bus expenses, I believe, are out of Measure A or Measure C, or Prop A, Prop C. So it's a combination.
And Madam Mayor, if I may, the Prop A and Prop C dollars they're only eligible for certain areas of transit. So you can't exceed the county, as an
I know,
example.
you can go to, you can't go to Las Vegas.
Correct.
You have to go to the border.
Right. Everything in LA County.
So you can go to San Diego.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's some limitations on it as well.
Then the other part that was limited, that you must publicize it to the entire public, which they are to the public. That's so as everybody can get on the bus and go. But so
But a recommendation that I had, and on what happened, use Measure A up until the point where it's no longer feasible. And then you start charging from that point on. So it might not be the full cost because Measure A and C is covering the cost, but to go, we can't go to Vegas anymore anyway, but just use Vegas as an illustration. Then from Vegas, what's that line, the border? State line, I should know, I'm there all the time.
you mean Whiskey Pete?
Then you charge, because now you look like you're double dipping to me. You're getting monies from Measure A, B, or C, A or C, to pay for the Prop C, and then you're also charging the residents to be on the bus, which is already paid for. So to go from here to San Diego was free, but if you went any further into TJ, it was a cost. We don't go there. No, we don't. But I'm just saying, if we were, you're getting money from Prop A and you're also charging the residents, basically what I'm saying, for the same service.
Yes, but it also, if you charge the residents more, you have now able to take that Prop A money and use it in other areas.
Like
So-
what? We getting a new bus? Okay.
But
We need a new bus.
Whatever you charge for non-residents is okay, but the residents although most of the people that's on these excursions are our seniors, and they're on a fixed income.
And they voted for the.
And they like to go, and they like the fact that we start doing these excursions again, because we had taken them out. So as much as we can to keep their costs down, the same or less, and then anyone else, non-residents, because we have to advertise to everyone. We love our seniors.
As you should. That's all I had, and it sounds like we got some pretty clear direction today, so.
Yeah, leave our residents alone.
Very clear.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. He did. Yeah. Quick question to staff. Some of the seniors have been asking, since they have not been going on excursions, and they said they in their mind, do we have excursions in the bank? So may I want to go on 2 or 3 since I didn't go the prior years?
Everything was shut down.
I know. We have yeah, that's true. The budget doesn't carry over. Maybe if we had thought about it back then, we could have carried over now. But
I want to make sure they see me. I asked that question, so you know.
yeah, we don't have extra ones. Actually, we have a pretty full calendar of scheduled events that we have between now throughout the end of the year. Our transportation department has done a great job in making sure that they have brought those senior programs back, but they've covered the entire year in regards to trips so far.
Okay.
And we all get up for summer with our excursions for our kids. And your goals and objectives, you should have, each park should be going on an excursion every, week?
Once a week.
Once a week. We want our kids up and moving. What else do we need? Any further comments to my colleagues? Anything you want to say? You ready to go?
Meeting adjourned.
Okay, let me get my gavel.
Why don't you do us like you did us the other night?
This meeting is adjourned.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Excellent.
Good meeting. two measures. And,
I just wanted to, because I've been telling the people in the lake like that.
not,
Oh, man, he was. I know he's staying in my district. Y'all go get protesting against me.
oh, you, that was not nice.